Welcome, everybody. Today, I'd like to introduce Gigi. She's got an incredible story, a recovery story. So, without any more delays, let's give me the gist of what was your perfect storm? What were the symptoms? Let's go into detail with the symptoms, and then we'll take it from there. Awesome.
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you too. Yeah. So my story was certainly a varied one. I wish I could say I was one person who had just a single symptom, but that wasn't the situation. So my story started when I was actually pretty young. So when I was around 11, 12, I was diagnosed with Ehlers Danlos. Now, that as a diagnosis didn't come because of actually any physical symptoms at the time. It was purely because doctors took one look at me and were like, you're a little bit taller and more slender than usual, so we're just going to tell you that you have a genetic condition. And so obviously that was a great confidence boost when you're a teenager, being like, yeah, you really don't look normal. So anyway, I was given this diagnosis of Ehlers Danlos, and at the time they said, well, you might go on to develop a whole bunch of different conditions. But I was kind of fine at that stage. I didn't really take it too seriously, but unsurprisingly, not long after, I started to develop a whole bunch of different symptoms. So my first set of symptoms was probably the POTS. And so that manifested for me in many different ways. I would have crazy tachycardia, would be rushed to the hospital, kept in, admitted. I would have wild dizziness every time I would sit just vaguely up in bed. It wasn't even standing up to walk around. It was just a mild incline in bed. I would start to feel like I was about to pass out. I would start to have incredible sensory overload. So, I mean, it would be somebody would breathe too loudly and I would feel like my whole system was shutting down, or the lights would be on. Basically, I just turned into the most antisocial human being on planet Earth, because any form of sensory stimuli would just send me into shutdown. So whether
So did you also have the anxieties and the
yes,
PTSD?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my anxiety was through the roof, because when this first starts happening to you, it doesn't feel normal. It doesn't feel right. And so you have this feeling every single time it happens. I think a really common description of people with POTS is, I feel like I'm dying every single time it happens. And so, I think that explains many of our hospital visits. And, that can almost be traumatic in and of itself, because every single time you go, you then get discharged without any real answers of, why is this happening to me? What's going wrong? It's just like oh, I'm sorry, we'll just give you an IV and, make you more hydrated, and then you're off on your merry way, without any sort of
Did they ever get annoyed with you? Did they ever go, oh, here she comes again?
I mean, well, maybe because I went to different places all of the time.
You're smart.
So, yeah, I think maybe I was just more conniving. I was like, well, but I mean, I was actually, I have to say, in general, I was my doctors were really kind and really understanding. And the thing is, it was kind of a double-edged sword, because they would always say, we're so sorry that this is happening to you, but it's because of your Ehlers Danlos. And so that was kind of the double-edged sword, is you were getting this love, you were getting this safety when you were with them, but at the same time, it was reinforcing the belief that you are broken and this is happening for a reason. So it was a real sort of, well, I say now a love-hate relationship, but at the time I did feel genuinely supported. But I just carried on trying to live my life, and I was told that I could eat the world's supply of salt and never have anything go wrong. So I was literally doing just that. I was, probably objectively speaking, eating incredibly unhealthily, but my symptoms just continued to develop. I mean, I was somebody who cared a lot about performing well and how people perceived me. And I've never been introverted. I think that this is something that in the TMS community, people think, oh, we just have to be meek and mild and shy. And of course that can be some of us, but I was always somebody, if you ask anyone in my family whether I've ever suppressed my experiences, no, I think they would say I was pretty vocal with how I felt about things. But I did have really, really bad anxiety. But my symptoms just continued. They developed. I started getting neuropathy. Now, neuropathy of all different kinds. So I had these really weird sensations of what felt like eggs cracking on my head, and I would feel the yolk come down, or what I felt would be like the yolk. And then when it would reach my eyes, I would feel like I was about to pass out. And I would have buzzing, tingly sensations in my feet, in my arms, in my ribs. I mean, all over, really.
Yeah.
And then it started to morph into pain and digestive issues. I mean, I could spend so long talking about the the different symptoms that I had. It kind of just depends which one I'm going to pick today.
Did you ever have
But
like sensations like water's dripping or somebody's putting something hot against your skin?
yes. So there was one time where I was decorating the Christmas tree and I just said to my mom, I said, it feels like somebody is pouring warm water all over my leg. And it was just on one
Yep.
leg. And it was just that, I mean, it just feels exactly like that. And how do you explain that when you're decorating a Christmas tree, nowhere near any water at all? And you're like, well, suddenly it feels like, you know, I'm swimming. So
Yeah.
I think that many people were intensely confused by what was going on with me because the symptoms were, I mean, to people who don't know about this, the symptoms seemed odd. They seemed strange.
Oh,
I think that's what caused a lot of concern and why I kept going back to the doctor, because I was like, this cannot just be Ehlers Danlos, you know. And I think this is a thing that never really made sense to me, is why is it that these symptoms have happened now, whereas Ehlers Danlos is technically speaking a genetic condition? You know, why didn't I have them my entire life? That was something that never ever made sense to me, and I think that was what freaked me out so much. I was like, well,
yeah.
I don't understand that this can just be a genetic condition, because, you know, this is suddenly exploded into my life, and that was very confusing.
Right. Did you go
Yeah.
down the rabbit hole of maybe this is MS, that
Yes,
whole,
yes, of course.
or
Of course.
ALS, the big
Yeah,
one?
yeah. And the thing is, you know, what was possibly, you know, more concerning at the time is it was a lot of doctors that suggested that it might be MS. You know, they were saying this is weird, and we really should investigate this. And again, it was by very well-meaning doctors. They were genuinely concerned by what was happening, and they didn't want to be, you know, medically irresponsible. And so they sent me for all these tests. So I mean, I had all the tests that you could possibly think of. I had the MRIs, the CT scans, the blood work, the, you know, the any other further investigation, and it never revealed exactly why these things were happening or why I was progressing in the way that I was progressing. And so I was
Yep.
basically just encouraged to live my life in, you know, in a way that I can. And like I said, I was very sort of, it really meant a lot to me, my performance, my schoolwork, and I actually had always wanted to pursue a career in academia. And so it was kind of this interesting dynamic where I was taking the doctor's word for it that I was okay, but combining that with panic over not knowing what was going on.
Yeah.
So I really ended up living my life in just a series of boom and busts, where I
Right.
would, you know,
I
try
like
and
that.
do
Boom
things.
and busts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Same
So
thing here.
we
Yeah.
say that a lot in biology, and that's my background. I ended up going to Oxford doing biology. That was kind of my interest, was based on the fact that I was like, why am I feeling so unwell so often? And that kind
Yeah.
of fueled my obsession with it. And but there would be times where I'd try and be really social, see everybody, work really hard for exams, and what would happen is after those periods I would just be laid low. And it wasn't just for a couple of days. I mean, months and months and months and months. I would just be bedbound, not able to do anything. And then this just continued to progress, and the amount of time that I had to spend in bed just continued and continued, and just, yeah, totally spiraled. But there was nothing I could do because I didn't have any answers. So it was just, I just tried the best that I could. But I think it was really confusing for so many of my friends and family, because there they were looking at what the doctors were saying there's no real reason for her to be feeling as bad as she's feeling. And then there was me in bed with the lights off, not allowing anyone to come into my room and speak to me, because I was saying that my experience was so debilitating. And that was pretty hard to it was quite hard for them to rationalize how my experience was the way that it was. So I think for that, again, put a lot of pressure on me, because I think a lot of the time I felt like people just didn't understand what I was going through. And I think I had fears that people thought I was being dramatic or
Right.
hyperbolic. And, you know, that has a huge mental toll on you, because you know that you don't want to be unwell, you know that you don't feel normal,
Right.
but how can you express that to people when, you know, when the tests that they're using aren't necessarily effective at demonstrating that?
Did you have any food sensitivities?
Yes, yes.
Must have.
So
I was
food
like, she
sensitivity.
has to. I was thinking that she
Yeah.
must have had food sensitivity.
Yeah. Then went down, it was suggested that I had MCAS. I would come out in full body rashes. Forgot about
Yeah.
that. It's only when sometimes people trigger me about spit, as in like trigger a specific symptom, say, did you have that? And I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Yeah, I did have that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, had full body rashes. I remember there was one time in hospital where the nurse was sort of unbuttoning my top and she said, is it normal for you to have a rash? And of course, what did that do? Send me into a complete tailspin. It's like, no. And that was the start of that. So yeah, I had digestive issues. I had real IBS type symptoms for a very long period of time. And then, I went down all of the, what I say now, generic routes. But I mean, I went down the medical route. When that didn't help me in terms of the medical treatment that was offered, I then did what most people do, which is go down a more holistic route. So I saw
the opposite,
all the
evil.
form of, exactly. So all the functional medicine doctors, I was told that I had mold toxicity. I was told about the various food sensitivities that they said that I had. I tried my hardest to follow protocols, to do the right thing, and just nothing was working. I saw the chiropractor. I had one really nice chiropractor who didn't actually fearmonger me, but which I think is quite unusual. So often I have a lot of clients who are like, no, I was made to feel like I was so structurally fragile. This lovely guy just said, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help anymore. He was like, I've done everything that I can do. And in a way it was a blessing, because he wasn't making, he wasn't sort of fear mongering me more. But the downside at the time was I just felt so hopeless. I was like, if conventional medicine can't help me, if the opposite to conventional medicine can't help me, where does that leave me? But I had no other choice but to just try and survive. So that's exactly what I did. And
did you have any
then,
like safe foods at all? Like 5 foods you could only eat? Were you in that category?
Rice.
Right.
I love rice.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I can't even quantify how much rice I've eaten in my life. It's, I mean, just a ridiculous amount. Yeah, I would say rice. I mean, I was gluten-free for years. I went through a period that, this is kind of the irony, is I went through a period of almost the healthier I tried to be, the more avocados I ate, the more green foods I incorporated, the worse I became. And that's not to say that these foods are terrible for you, but it was all the narrative of me trying to fix, me thinking that I was broken. And the more I tried to fix, the more I tried to solve or figure out, of course, the more overwhelmed you become. And the worse the symptoms are, because my hypervigilance was only growing. I was just caring more and more and more. And
so did you also have the histamine intolerance, all those?
So the rashes
off.
were linked. Yeah, the rashes were linked to histamine intolerance. So then I went, I tried to go as histamine free as possible. I mean, it wasn't even, the reason I ended up with rice as the staple food was pretty much everything else was written off, because by the time you go oxalate free, by the time you go histamine free, by the time you go, give up gluten, what else can you eat? I mean, you're really running out of options. Oh, dairy free. I mean, by the time you you quit all of those things, you're linked with all, you're left with almost
plus
food.
Everything had to be frozen and cooked and then eaten right away. You couldn't just put it in the fridge for the next day. For me, it was beef, rice, and apples. That's all I could live off of for a year and a half.
It's just crazy. And then you go online, they say it has to be fresh meat. The normal supermarket doesn't suffice. You have to find the local butcher. For me, I come from Bermuda, which is an island. Everything is imported. So then you think, okay, well, what am I meant to do? There's nothing I can do. So it's just increasing levels of despair. And then, unfortunately, my mum had always been my biggest supporter, my biggest advocate, had always told me, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find out what's going on. And she had her own health emergency. Right. And that caused me a huge amount of overwhelm. I think that was really one of the worst periods of my life, because suddenly my emotional safety net, I felt like, had temporarily been taken away from me. And that was the only way that I'd been able to survive before. And, unsurprisingly, several months down the line, it wasn't this perfect correlation. It wasn't like it happened and then a day later, a new symptom came. But, several months later, I started getting my bladder symptoms. So, I mean, by this point, I've forgotten to mention the fatigue, but, I had POTS, I had, fibromyalgia type pain, I had fatigue, I had all the digestive symptoms, everything that I've just described. And now suddenly I have the bladder symptoms. And ironically, and it's not actually a coincidence, but, roughly around a month before, again, like I say, coming from Bermuda, small news stories are big news stories there, because there's not necessarily a lot of news. And on the news that day, there had been a story about a new urologist moving to the island. That was like the big headline. And I remember saying to my mum, well, of all the things that I've never had to deal with, I haven't seen the urologist yet, because I haven't needed to see a urologist yet. Cue a month later, or a little bit longer, I can't quite remember, what starts to happen. I start to get bladder symptoms. And it started as just the feeling of when I would urinate, it was just feeling like I would need to go again, very soon after, just this urgency that would build up. And then it turned into urgency plus this pressure, this just feeling of my bladder just constantly being squeezed. And then it just continued to explode. It then very, very rapidly became extraordinarily painful. I mean, just I can't describe the level of pain. So I did the only thing that I knew what to do, which was I just went back to the doctor and I was like, I think I have a UTI, because I had no idea. I was trying to not freak myself out and assume that it was something chronic. And so I asked for some antibiotics, and she said, no, there's no current sign of infection, so we're not going to do that. At that point, I start freaking out. At that point, I'm like, why can nothing be simple? What is going on? Like, why is this happening to me? And by this point, in the space of 3-4 days, the time it takes to do the initial culture, my symptoms are, I know this doesn't exist, but 15 out of 10. I've never experienced anything like it to this point.
So you got pain. For me, it was testicle pain in my pelvic floor that radiated to my anus, stabbing pain in my bladder.
All of the above. It started with urgency, apart from the testicle pain for me.
I was just gonna say.
All of the above. No, it started with the urgency, went to the pressure, then it went to localized bladder pain, and then as time went on, it just shifted, morphed. But I mean, when I say shifted and morphed, like the initial symptoms stayed the same, it was just amplified. It was amplified, and the symptoms diversified. So it just became more and more extreme. So I really didn't know what to do. I just kept going back, and my clients always laugh at me now, but I went to the doctor, and I kid you not, every single day. I had a morning slot. I would go every single day and say, please, find something, do something. Like I what else to do. That was my social interaction, was how long I would speak to the doctor. And she was lovely. Even now, she was an incredible doctor, but she had nothing to say. I mean, nothing. So she sent me to the urologist. I had a whole bunch of more detailed testing done. Again, there was no explanation for what was going on. And at that point, I was given the diagnosis of IC, interstitial cystitis. So in fairness to my lovely GP, she said, I'm going to diagnose you with IC, but I want you to know that it won't always be this bad. But for me, I mean, at this point, I was coming from a scientific background. That didn't reassure me much, even though she was saying the best thing that she could say in that moment. I thought, well, how do you know it's not going to always be this bad when you're not telling me what's causing this? How could you possibly know that? So it didn't really hit me in the same way, although in hindsight, I think she was, trying her best. But I did the only thing that I knew what to do, which was to go into the academic literature. I mean, I had so much free time because I wasn't able to, continue with my study. I mean, I graduated from university and had done my master's, but at that point, I'd really had to stop because I was bedbound. And so I just went into the academic literature, and the things that you read about IC, I know that you'll be familiar with this, but I mean, horrifying, truly
well, did
horrifying.
did you have internet in the island?
Yes, absolutely.
Did you ever go down the rabbit holes on the internet? And the Facebook
Or
groups.
yeah, so the Facebook groups, that came after, but the academic literature to begin with, that was my that was my jam. So I would spend all day reading papers. I mean,
Yeah.
all day, and anything that you read about IC, or most of the things that you read about IC in the academic literature, is horrific. I mean, it's, you know, we don't know what causes this. The treatment options are terrible. There are cases of people having their bladder removed and their symptoms don't go away.
Oh my.
I was just
How
thinking,
horrible.
yeah, my life is over. That was the conclusion every single day when I would shut the laptop. It was, my life is over, and I can't believe that this has happened to me. But I didn't have anything else to do. I mean, at this point, I remember saying to my mum on one day, I said, I just cannot believe that I'm this unlucky. How is it that one person has so many different diagnoses? How is it possible? And how is it always just linked back to Ehlers Danlos? I just don't understand it.
Well, before I was like, I would see people like this, these freak shows on, you know, you hear about them. They have all these symptoms, like, and I would remember thinking, wow, that's crazy. And then you become that, and you're like, how is this? Is this a movie? Am I? And I'd slap myself. I'm like, please let this reality change, please. And then you have no other choice but to have a freak out.
Right. It's the scariest thing, because you're the person who's experiencing it. You know how real it is. You know how much pain you're in, and yet nobody else can perceive that. I always say, I still say this now, if anyone wanted to feel what torture was like, it's that. It's, you know, those symptoms are like nothing. They were the peak of my personal physical capacity of what I could deal with. I personally couldn't deal with it anymore. And luckily, whilst I was going down all of the academic literature routes, which was pretty horrifying, my mum was far more open-minded, or possibly even more desperate, although I don't think that's possible. But she was looking at anything, and she was going to bed one night, and, you know, Nicole Sachs's podcast came up, and she is called The Cure for Chronic Pain, and she said, well, that sounds pretty relevant to our life, right? That sounds like a pretty good name.
So how long did you, well, how old were you, and how long were you dealing with this, with these batch of symptoms?
So
and how long did it last?
So, okay, so this is I'm going to be very, very annoying. I never tell people how sort of the end dates of my story. The reason why is because I'm not trying to be deliberately elusive, but I know for me, when I was recovering, I was so obsessed with how long it took people to recover. I mean, so obsessed. It was like the thing that I would fast forward to in every recovery video. And it can never, ever serve anyone. Because the thing is if somebody were to listen to this and get better faster than me, they don't care. They don't care how long it took me to get better. You know, the only thing that they care about is the fact that they're getting better. But if I say a time and somebody says, I've been doing this longer than that, suddenly it becomes something that fuels overwhelm, fuels doubt. Am I doing this wrong? Am I on the wrong track? So
well, there's always a reason. And for me, I want to know, what were the delays? Were you stuck with misinformation for long? Were you stuck with the brainwashing of what's out there for how long? And when did you finally find the information? And how long were you consistent with it? There's all these what ifs of, you know, our journey. And I think they were necessary for us to go through, because you just learn more shit, right? It just builds more information. The contrast is there. Like all the bullshit, the delays that I had, the freakouts that I had, you know, at the time they seemed like they're a waste and it was garbage. But when I look back now, I'm like, I'm happy I had those freakouts, because I was building leverage of knowing.
Totally. I always say, you know, when you're learning how to ride a bike, you have to fall. Every single time you fall, your brain is building an algorithm on how to maintain your balance better. So, I mean, my initial major resistance, and this was specifically just for the bladder symptoms. So it was my mum who obviously brought TMS as a concept to me. I was incredibly insulted. I mean, incredibly insulted. We had what I would say was probably one of our biggest arguments, about me saying, you have no idea what I'm going through. if you
Yeah.
think that it's in my head. That's the way I interpreted it at the time. I know, we'll obviously discuss why it's not in your head. But at the time, that's how I really interpreted what she was saying. I thought that she was saying that I was dramatic or I was over exaggerating. I've never felt
Right.
more validated in my life, and I just thought it was garbage. I just
Right.
couldn't believe it. And so I said to her, I said, if you can find one person who's dealt with what I've dealt with and recovered, just one, I'll maybe listen to them.
Okay.
Like, maybe, because I was like, I have to, the reason I said that is because I genuinely didn't think that she was ever going to be able to find anybody who'd recovered with what I had. So I was like, that's a pretty decent challenge,
Which is interesting, because you would rather stay sick and be right than have the answer and be wrong and go, oh fuck, I guess I got to try this. Right.
Yeah.
It's because you wanted to have that justice of, here's my case. I got my lawyers here, exhibit A, exhibit B. I'm going to win this case no matter what, if that means that I'm going to stay sick, which is crazy, because I did the same thing.
Yeah, and I think it was, I just didn't have the understanding to realize that what she was saying wasn't invalidating. And at the time, I also had what was, very in vogue and still partially in vogue with bladder symptoms, which is the embedded infection hypothesis, and the idea that actually the symptoms are just as a result of an embedded infection. And that was really playing on my mind. That to me felt far more it felt far more validating for my symptom experience, because I thought, finally, here's somebody who's taking me seriously. They're not telling me it's in my head. They're saying that it's real. And I knew my symptoms were real. So it made sense to me, the idea that it was as a result of something structural that were going on. So I needed emotionally to pursue that before. And this is why I talk about, the concept of it's really important that you go through these things in order to come out the other side. That was a perfect example of it. One of the best decisions I actually ever made in my recovery was going down that hypothesis, even though it was not at all what was going on with my symptoms. But the reason why is because, I went back to my GP and I begged her for some antibiotics. I just, I said, I can't live life like this, please. I found this. Some people think that this is what's going on. And she was very compassionate, and she complied, and she wrote me a prescription, and I took it. And like I said, it was the best thing that I ever did, because after 2 hours of taking the first antibiotic, my symptoms went down from a 15 out of a 10 to around a 3 or 4. Now, I knew, biologically speaking, that's not possible, because antibiotics take around 24 hours plus to come into effect. So that was where, my scientific understanding could actually rationally see that my response was not what we would expect. It wasn't normal. But at that point, I didn't care, because my symptoms for the first time had gone to around a 3. I was like, oh my God, sweet, perfect, sweet relief. I'll carry on taking it. So I carried on taking the antibiotics, and on day 4, my symptoms started coming back again.
Right.
And so at that point, then I was like,
did they get worse because of the antibiotics? Because the antibiotics can trigger a lot of stress on the body, or was it just same old?
No, it was just same old, but it went from going down to just coming back. And I was able to say, that really doesn't make a lot of sense, because there's no way that this so-called infection was sensitive enough to respond in the quickest possible known time to suddenly become resistant, where at 4 days they're now no longer responding. That just didn't make any scientific sense to me. And at that point, I thought, well, if this just happened, maybe what my mum was saying actually makes more sense. And so at that point, she had found somebody who she thought sounded like mildly similar to my story, and I pushed it off. And at that point, I was willing to give it a go, and I listened. And I think there's something really powerful about when you hear people talk about their experience. This woman that I listened to, you could tell how real her symptoms were. You could tell how much they had impacted her life. There was no denying that. And I think when I heard somebody else describe the symptoms that they were going through and how similar they had been to my own, then I was
How did you feel? What happened when you were listening? Were you like at the edge of your seat? You were like, oh.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it sounds terrible. I was like, thank God she suffered so much, because
Yeah.
that makes me believe a little bit more that this is possible. And the way that I describe it is, it just opened the door. I had been through so much trauma in terms of how bad my symptoms were, how much they had taken away from me in my life. This was me just cracking a jar the possibility that I could be okay. But that's all it really was. That was the start of something, and it was enough for me to take it seriously enough to do more research to try and figure out. And that was the start of it all. Now, of course, I had many, as everyone does, setbacks along the way. I mean, my understanding really just developed over time, and some sticking points were, when I didn't have any major obvious form of emotional overwhelm, why did I then randomly get symptoms? Over time I realized it's because these are neural circuits that become habits in the brain, and the brain can't rewire all of the time. It can't learn constantly in the same way that we would never expect a kid to be in the classroom 24 hours a day. We can't expect adult brains to be in the classroom 24 hours a day. And so when my brain needed a break, its break time was just slipping back into old neural pathways, which were pain, right? So that was one lesson that I learned along the way, that there doesn't always have to be a deeper emotional cause. Sometimes it can just be a habit. But it was more just figuring these things out over time. And I never say how long the journey took, but it wasn't a quick one. It wasn't a book cure by any means, because I was just figuring these things out constantly, and having these setbacks. And I think the one thing that really helped was trying to have what I call now this growth mindset of, if we have a challenge, if we have something that we don't understand, it's what can we try and learn from it, rather than allowing it to defeat us, rather than trying to be, rather than sort of resorting back into that I'm the person that's not going to get better, or this isn't working for me. It's, the science of this is too strong. It's too compelling, it's too convincing. And so what is it that I can take away from this situation? And I think my sort of willingness to build upon a foundation is what allowed me to, get there in the end. I always say it's about persistence and patience. That's it.
Right. So, so then you just kept on going. You started seeing the evidence of certain symptoms going away, which gave you more motivation. Because for me, it was all about evidence, and talking with people that went through this was what kept me going, to kept the faith, because my 3D reality was lying to me and telling me everything I researched in the past was all a lie, smokes and mirrors. So the only thing that, after a year and a half, 2 years, things were getting worse, and I was still staying on the path. Not too many people would stay on the path when you're still dealing with symptoms and things are getting worse. So what made me stay on the path was talking to people that were on, positive people that been through this, had the exact same symptoms, and I would bug them once in a while. I'm sure I was annoying a couple times, but once in a while I'd ask them, like, blah, 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 did you feel this? Yeah, don't worry, it melts away, blah, blah, blah. And did you feel, yeah. And then, being able to tap into that once in a while kept me focused. And then having the evidence pop up, that's what I needed to stay on track. And then eventually I recovered. But there's a whole while there where you're walking up a mountain of lava in flip-flops, and you got to still keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I think for me, the thing that gave me the conviction was just the science of it. The science exists, the academic literature exists supporting this. And that was my equivalent of talking to somebody. Now, don't get me wrong, I listened to recovery stories, but I think the one thing that I found interesting is when you listen to everybody's recovery story, everybody says that they did something different, right? Everybody says, somatic tracking was the thing that saved me, or journaling was the thing that saved me. And I found that a little bit confusing. I was like, well, how is it that different people with completely different techniques are all coming to the conclusion of still getting better? And one of the things that I realized along the way, that it's not what you do, it's how you feel when you're doing it. It's whether it becomes something that reduces overwhelm or something that adds overwhelm.
Right. So in a way, they might look like they're different techniques, but you can see a lot of similarities with all the people I interview, and they do a
Yeah.
lot of different things than I did. Of course, I'm like, my way's the best, and their way,
Yeah.
their best, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
like that. I'm a Taurus. I'm stubborn. But then I look at it. I try to be open minded, and I go, well, you know what? There is a lot of similarities. If you break
Yeah.
it all down, what's the root? Well, that's the same as this, right? And you
Yeah.
can see the similarities and the core message.
Absolutely. You know, every single technique is designed to help you to let go. You know,
Right.
that's the root. You know, whether it's to let go of, you know, something emotional externally that's happened to you, or whether it's designed as a technique to help you let go of the symptom itself. It's all designed to reduce the connection that we have with something, or to reduce the influence that something has over us. And that I found very liberating, because then it turned into a, well, I can't get this wrong then. You know,
Right.
if somebody says, you know, oh, I had to, you know, I had to do somatic tracking every single day. Okay, well, that's the thing that clearly made them feel in control and made them feel safe. But it's
Yeah.
not the somatic tracking that's important. It's what it did for them. And so that allowed me to experiment and become a lot more fluid with how I was dealing with things, you know, rather than trying to follow this strict prescription of what I had to do. Instead, it was, you know, encouraging me to more emotionally check in with myself and ask myself, what do I feel like I need today? You know, what could help me to reduce overwhelm? And even analyze, you know, what's the major source of overwhelm in my life right now? Is it the symptoms? At the beginning, it was like almost 100% the symptoms, because I wasn't living life. So there was nothing to get overwhelmed by in my external life, because I wasn't doing anything. So it's just 100% symptoms. So a lot of my work at the beginning was about feeling really comfortable with them, understanding why it was guaranteed that they were going to go. And over time, the more I started living life, it naturally began to move into that direction of more major sources of overwhelm were things that I was getting up to. And then it was about, you know, how do I check in with myself? How do I relate with myself? How do I soothe or be compassionate towards myself to help reduce that overwhelm? So my story and how I interacted with myself changed over time.
Did you at all, because of this journey, end up becoming, because I see this as a pattern, and for me it was huge. Did you end up becoming spiritual through this journey?
I think it's really hard not to. It's one of those things that, you know, I kind of laugh, because I was so, and this is not to say that you cannot be scientific and spiritual at the same time. There are many scientists that are very spiritual, but I was very by the book, very, you know, scientifically minded.
That's why I was hesitant to ask you, because I was hoping you were going to say yes. I was like, don't say no. And you said, I was like, yes.
Like, absolutely not. No. I was, you know, I was so by the book. And when you go through something like this, you are forced to change the way that you relate with yourself. You are forced to change the way that you prioritize yourself, and, you know, change your value of your own self-worth. That whole process is inherently spiritual, you know, and it changes the way that you view other people and the empathy that you have for everyone else, and you realize that there are so many common struggles in humanity. I mean, the whole experience widens your horizon of what you think is possible, widens your horizon and how you want to help. I think the reason why ultimately I became a TMS coach is because of that spirituality that you end up gaining, that you just want to share in this experience more and help people along their journeys.
What did your family think about your journey? Were they like amazed? Were people around you amazed at what was going on? And did they believe you that this was mind body or TMS? Or, because I know most of the people that are around me don't believe me. They still think, oh, it's all anxiety. That's why you had anxiety, right? So I had to deal with some of that woo-woo effect.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think my story, it was almost like she's back from the dead. You know, what's happened, and because it was so dramatic as a turnaround, it was, I cannot speak to anybody and the lights must be off, and, you know, no one must contact me, to I'm fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with me. I'm completely symptom free, and all I want to do is meet people and socialize with people that I haven't seen in a while. It was so ridiculous. It was such a 180. I think people realize that in order for me to have recovered, there must have actually been something going wrong in the first place. And
Okay.
when I say going wrong, I don't mean that TMS is something that's going wrong. That's something that I very heavily
Right.
believe. But it kind of meant that people who had doubted my experience to begin with suddenly believed. It wasn't just, oh, she's anxious, or oh, she was dramatic. It was, if somebody can make such a big turnaround in their life, it has to have been a pretty major or effective intervention that allowed them to become like this. And so
Yeah.
I think I was really, really lucky with my friends, my family, even family members who hadn't actually been particularly supportive when I was really struggling. They just became the biggest ambassadors for this work, because they
Yeah.
realized that there has to be something to this, because she's a completely different person.
Right. So with food, how did you start to introduce? Did you also go through the struggles of, you still had flares, you're trying to get the foods in, and then eventually it would be, you had 10 foods in, and then you'd be back down to 5, and then you go back, it'd be back and forth. Did you have that difficult struggle?
Yeah, I think that that's completely normal in
Yeah.
exposure, because when you first start doing something, you haven't yet unlearned that it's not dangerous, right? So
Hmm.
when you first start doing something, of course your brain hasn't had the opportunity to change its perspective yet. So it's very normal it's completely standard to get symptoms to begin with. So I think that's what I try to use is, with everything, I just did a deep dive. How does exposure therapy normally work?
Hmm.
How do people normally respond? And I would think about it in the context of people with like a fear of spiders. So
Hmm.
when you have
Yeah.
somebody who has a fear of spiders and they first start exposure therapy, no one's chilled when they first start
Huh.
exposure therapy. No one's
Huh.
not scared. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing the exposure therapy. If they were super
Right.
relaxed and didn't have any symptoms of anxiety, where's the problem? There isn't any, right?
Right.
And so by being able to view it in that context, I was able to view it as completely normal to get symptoms. Now,
Right.
of course, there's a level of how much we're willing to tolerate before we start getting
Mhm.
freaked out, right? So,
Right.
of course, that's where for some things I did take a more graded exposure approach, and it wasn't
Yeah.
because I didn't think it was safe for me to do, but it was, I know that there's going to be a certain level of symptoms that I'm willing to tolerate before I lose it. And so let's try
Right.
not reach that level. So that's why I decided to do the food thing in a more graded way. With
Yeah.
other aspects of my life, I was more willing to just throw myself back into it a little bit,
Hmm.
because it was like, oh, I can so clearly see that this isn't a structural problem, and the symptom wasn't as effective at capturing my attention. It
Right.
didn't hold the same fear response with me. And so with those things, I just chucked myself into it, because the chances of me not having a corrective experience were much more, it's much more minimized. So
Yeah.
I kind of did graded exposure versus flat out exposure depending on my relationship with the symptom.
Yeah. With me, it was food. I had to wait a year and a half before I could even start training. But with multiple chemical sensitivity, I went full steam ahead. I was out of there after a week. I was like, okay, that's done. This is done. Gastritis, that's done. Blah, blah, blah. Right. But with food, a little slower. Digestion takes more time, and that's okay. But yeah, and then I would also, with food, I would start with the low hanging fruit, like the easier things, and then eventually, like the tomato was later, the avocado or the fish was a little bit later. But in the beginning,
Yeah,
it was the apples, and then maybe the chicken, and then the
yeah.
pork. Okay, and then maybe the easier shit. But then eventually, I would graduate to the because I'm sure everybody's different, but for me, I knew it was the scarier foods because I found out, right? I made the mistakes. I found out, okay, well, that's really I cannot expose myself to this, but I can, you know, have tolerable flares with these other foods, and then start doing the more challenging stuff a little bit later.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about what specific food, or what specific, trigger, if you will, holds the most amount of fear for you, and
Yeah.
building up, proving to yourself that it's safe to do those things. Now, for some people I work with, they say, well, why would I do graded exposure if I genuinely believe that there's nothing wrong with me? That almost reaffirms the idea that there's something wrong with me, that I have to go
Right.
slow. That's a
Yeah.
completely valid perspective. But for some people, their confidence needs to be built over time with something, and
Hmm.
starting with the low hanging fruit is the best way to begin, to begin that journey.
Well, I even used to make examples with my mom. I'd be like, she's like, it's because you're scared. And what I'm like, I'm not. Honestly, I'm not. This
Yeah,
tomato, I don't give three shits about it. I'm not scared of the. I'll eat it, but I'll have my brain for some reason wants to have a reaction. She's like, because you are scared. I'm like, I'm not scared. So we'd be in this battle, right?
yeah,
But it was right. So, and I was like, I'm not scared of this fruit, but I'm having a reaction because she would keep. In a way, it was like I was looking for validation that there,
yeah,
it's not, it's she kept blaming it on anxiety. She'd be like, Elmo, you have anxiety. That's all that you have anxiety. I'm like, I don't care about it. I'm chill. She's like, calm down and eat the food and you'll be okay. I'm like, okay, I'll prove it to you. Watch. I'm calmed down. I'm gonna eat this tomato. I'm gonna prove it to you. And I was in the shitter for 2 weeks. I'm like,
yeah.
see, right? So
Exactly. What an effective way to prove your point.
I
There's
had sometimes I
nothing.
just had to because she was relentless, and I had to prove it to her. So I would suffer to prove it.
Yeah, I think many of us can go down that route as well, just because I think again it's about proving that this is real. Like we're always trying to
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate that what we're experiencing is valid, and that need to do so comes from the fact that often from the insecurity of we ourselves don't fully understand what's going on,
Yeah.
and so I felt the need to validate what I was going through to almost everybody in my life. So I
Right.
completely relate to that.
Do you ever maybe still I do. I still get this where I've been through this journey. I've discovered something like I feel like it's this secret. Like I'm a unicorn. I'm special because this is like I'm a part of a club, right? And then when I see other people going through stuff, sometimes I have to hold myself back because and I see it everywhere. Everywhere I go,
Of
I
course.
see people's buckets are full. I can see your bucket. I can see how this is all mind body, right? And then I'm tempted. Like I used to tell everybody, like, oh yeah, blah, 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 blah. But it'd be exhausting for me, and also exhausting for the looks I would get from people. Go, okay, this guy's nuts. So
Yeah.
it's like I have to control my urges to, talk about it with everybody.
Yeah, it is so hard, and I think the thing about it is exactly what you've just said. When you say it at a time where somebody's not ready to receive it, you know that what you have just said is it's not only been shelved, but it's possibly been put in the permanently discard pile. so, so if you
Yeah, it's
say
like,
it at the wrong
it's
time,
like,
it's like I'm
yeah,
actually going to remember that, and I'm never going to give it a go because you've just said it, and I resent you for saying it. So I think
yeah,
after having some experiences like that, where I was like, oh God, I really clearly haven't, said it at the correct time, I began to realize that, people could look at my story and without even saying anything, I had close friends who were going through their own stuff.
yeah,
And, I wasn't trying to preach to them what I was doing, but they could see because they had similar symptom experiences to me that I wasn't suffering any longer. And so
yeah.
natural curiosity kicks in. If you have somebody who's not really sharing, they're just kind of living their life more. I found that the less I said, the more questions I would have about what is it that's going on, because something is different. You're really not going back to
Well,
that
that's
place.
that's what I told myself I was going to do because when it's family, it makes it more difficult. When it's your brother, your mom, your daughter,
Yeah.
it takes you like you. Please trust me. Please listen to me.
Yeah.
Trust me. And then you can't say I'm like, okay, what can I do? Well, I can make a lot of noise here, right, and a lot of noise online. Get as many examples, and maybe down the road, people will be like, "So, yeah, what are you doing there? That's interesting. Okay, I'm ready to try now." Even my wife,
Yeah.
right? She's not ready. She's like, "I know, I'm not ready yet. When I'm ready, I'll tell you." I'm like,
Yeah.
"All right," and I stop being pushy about
Yeah. But in your head, you're like, are you ready yet? Please.
it. Yeah, I'm like, I can see it. Oh yeah, look. Oh, see this? Oh, that's mind body. That's yeah. And then she would even say it to me. Like, see, she stopped telling me the symptoms that she had because she'd be like, "Oh yeah, it's limbic, right? It's mind body. Yeah." So right. So I
Exactly.
stopped. I stopped.
I had a similar experience with my mum, of all people, the one who brought TMS to me,
Right.
the one who I had the argument over, and and she had a symptom that in my mind was so clearly mind body, and she said, no, it's not, it's going to be this, and I said, yeah, it's real, isn't it? It does feel real, now you can see that it's not all in your head, and eventually, she opened her mind. There was one very clear example where there had been an emotionally stressful situation, and she
Yeah.
immediately got the symptom. And I said,
Yeah.
huh,
Yeah.
isn't that a coincidence? Huh. And that was all I said. I just said,
Yeah.
maybe.
And then they go, dah, dah.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it.
You effectively become insufferable. That's the consequence of this.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I got a good question for you. If you were to go, if you had, let's say, God or your guides came to you and they said, all right, we're going to allow you to have a conversation with your past self. What would be something that you would tell yourself? And you were just starting this journey, right? You just started seeing that video, right? You're still kind of, I don't know. Okay, I'm going to do the work. What advice would you give yourself, speaking from the future self to your past? What would you tell yourself?
I think it would be follow what feels right for you right now. Because even if that's something like going down the medical route, which I did for a little while longer, it was so worthwhile, because the information that I gathered going through that experience is what really gave me the true conviction later down the line that this had to be what was going on. So it would always be follow what feels right for you. I have, some people who say, I think it might be TMS, but I'm just not ready to let go yet. That's completely fine. That's so fine. Rather than trying to force somebody to let go before they're ready, it's about encouraging them to ask themselves the question, what do I need to find out to help me to let go? Because those little bits of information are going to be the most effective in solidifying their journey down the line.
Which it's kind of funny you say that, because it reminds me, because now I'm into the spiritual realm, and when I hear these gurus talk, and they talk about, sometimes it's none of your business to help somebody else because they're going through a spiritual journey and they need to go through this thing. You can only offer it to them, or when they're ready, then give it to them. But sometimes you need to leave them alone. Let them. That's what they signed up for. This is what they need to experience this, and all the hell that they need to go through.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's oftentimes the worse the symptom experience is, the more willing you are to listen down the line. And so I find this a lot, with so many of my clients. I often get the question is, I've had the symptom for such a long period of time. Does that mean it's going to be tougher to get better? And often the answer is no, because you have been on the journey of trying to figure out for such a long time, you're actually ready to let go. You're ready to have that shift in perspective. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a curse having symptoms for a while. Actually,
for me, what I look at with somebody is their fear level. If their fear level is high enough, then I'm convinced that they're ready. For me, if my fear level wasn't high enough, I would have been lazy about it. I'd be like, oh, I'll do it next year. If God went, here's the key and here's the answers, go ahead, take a look. I'd be like, cool, I'm gonna go do something else, and I'll do it next year. But the fear, when I was dealing with the 75 symptoms, my life was upside down. I was forced. The fear was the driving force, and I harnessed it to keep me on the path. Right.
Yeah, it's when the stakes are high. Yeah. When stakes are high, you take it seriously. When you can sort of carry on the way that you're doing, which is exactly what I did in my, for the first 5 years of me having symptoms, actually longer, for in that whole period, I could just dabble with things. I was just, like I said, I was just living life as boom and bust. I was making it through. I wasn't changing anything.
Managing.
Because the stakes weren't high enough. But over time, the longer my symptoms lasted for, it became something that was intolerable for me. I couldn't live my life this way. I had to consider something else.
Sometimes for me, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to hold back and wait, because I can see it coming. The perfect storm's coming. It's brewing, right? I'm like, oh, no, you know what? You're not ready. Maybe in a couple years, it's coming. Sometimes I told a couple of my friends, like, oh, that's some nice thing to say. I'm like, oh, it's coming. Your perfect storm's coming. I could see your buckets getting really full. Okay, but not now. You need to fall on your face. You need to have the hell knocking on your door. And then it's going to be an asset.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you see somebody close to you go through something. You never take it seriously until it's happening to you. It would be so great if we could learn from other people's mistakes, but you know what? It often doesn't work that way. And instead it's until we ourselves can't do anything, we're not going to take it seriously, because why would we? We get away with as much as we get away with.
Yeah. It's like, for me, it was laziness. It was like, oh, I'm comfortable enough. Oh, I'm lazy. Fuck it. Right. But when I was screaming down the hallways, holding my head, asking why, help me, please. Then I was going to get shit done. So that's what you need. You need that.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think for me in my symptom experience, it was because I was so preoccupied by me trying to do things in my external life. It was like, I don't have time to deal with this. You know, it was like this back burner stress that was continuing to grow, but I was just refusing to sort of deal with it. So it's just this constant growing background stress that just continued to increase. And until it became the biggest priority in my life, I just didn't deal with it.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you would like to add for anybody that's listening that might be going through one of these symptoms or any of them?
Everybody thinks that they're the odd one out.
Yeah, or special.
Everybody
You're
thinks
special.
that. Everybody thinks, and I've never met anyone in this community who said otherwise. You know, everybody thinks that they're the one person that's not going to get better, but the science doesn't lie. You know, you're not the odd one out. The very fact that you have symptoms today is because your brain is neuroplastic, and that's the only thing that's needed to recover. And so by definition, the very fact that you might be sat there listening now, it's because you're not the odd one out. It's because your brain is neuroplastic, because that's why you have symptoms today.
Right. I'll tell people, you're not special. Right. It's kind of like, fuck you. It's kind of like, well, that's kind of, thank you, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not. Okay, that's good. That's good, right? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, exactly. You know, sometimes I'll say you're special in so many ways. It's just this one is not one of them.
Your personality, your hair, your style, that makes you special.
Exactly.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
Well, this was an amazing interview. I had a lot of fun. So what I'll get you to do is email me all your links and all, so that people can get a hold of you for coaching, your website, and I'm going to put it into the description. So thank you very much for joining me on this.
Oh my God, thank you. It's so fun speaking with people who get it, because it's like we both know how worthwhile it is. It's the most worthwhile thing you could ever do in your life. It's a gift. That's probably my final point is just do it. It's the best thing you'll ever do in your life. It really, really is.
Yeah, because coming on the other side of it, it's like an awakening, right? It's like an awakening. It's amazing. It's a gift.
It really is.
Awesome.
Best gift.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Had the best time.
Me too.